estimates are that there's some 31,000 metastasizing in a very rapid fashion into a much larger force. To many of us, that seems like an inadequate response to what... Would you please be quiet? I'm asking you now to please leave the room. Please remove the disruption. You're not going to be acceptable to anybody. Appreciate special attention from this group. Senator McCain.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight we have a number of topics that we can get into. Of course, the vaccine debate, the Democrats, the Republicans, Hillary Clinton, Ben Carson, all of these guys coming out in favor of vaccines and claiming that the science is settled. We'll talk about that. We've also got a lot of other things to get into. Ukraine, we have Syria, we have Greece, we've got George Soros, we've got John McCain, we've got anarchists, we've got all kinds of things to deal with. Of course, the situation in Ukraine, we are waiting to see the results of that, and of course the show is being recorded on February 15th. Tonight you'll be listening to it on February 16th, so there will be time in between. So whatever happens in between the time that this show is recorded and when you hear it, you'll have to bear with us here in the time lag. But before we get into any of these subjects, and I will freely admit that I don't think we're going to have time to get through all of these, we're going to be playing a good deal of catch-up tonight. But I would remind you that if you want to catch my show every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on ucy.tv, it's available there. You can also go to the show's personal webpage at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. And on that page, you'll find the chat room, you'll find the archive versions of this show, you'll find the links to my more recent articles there on the left-hand side of the page. Also, if you want to keep track of my work as it comes out regularly, then I would refer you to activistpost.com and also occasionally for naturalblaze.com. But if you're interested in my work specifically, then I would encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com, and that's the website where I repost all of my articles, all of the YouTube videos, all the interviews, all of the archive versions of this show, all of the relevant information. And there are links to the books there as well. You can go to the books tab and it will take you to the bookstore, and you can buy the books there as well. There's also an events page and a contact page if you want to reach out or see if there's any speaking events or anything going on. So there is that, BrandonTurbeville.com. Now we'll jump into the vaccine debate quickly, and we won't spend too much time on this, but we're just going to throw this out. We have, I've got this article, Political Scene Drags Vaccine Choice into Pre-Framed Debate over at naturalblaze.com and BrandonTurbeville.com. It's essentially a rundown, a report of the Hillary Clinton tweet. The Hillary Clinton tweet is, "The science is clear, the earth is round, the sky is blue, and hashtag vaccines work. Let's protect all our kids. Hashtag grandmothers know best." Now, let me first say, anybody who would take health advice from this witch, this demon of hell, has lost their mind a long time ago. This woman should not be looked at as a grandmother. She should be looked at as a psychopathic killer who should be locked away for eternity, for the rest of her natural life, not someone who should be having access to social media. So this came shortly after Rand Paul, of whom I'm no fan, was raked over the coals for just daring to suggest that parents have some input on whether or not their children are vaccinated. And we'll get into this a little more later. So just check that article out. It's over at naturalblaze.com and BrandonTurbeville.com. But I really want to jump into this this debate briefly. So Clinton comes out and says that, anybody who considers toxic chemicals like mercury or aluminum or polysorbate 80 or even live viruses to be cause for concern, they're essentially science deniers. All right, what she is calling science has by no means been settled. We've gone through this over and over on this show. But I would like to point out to you that, again, Rand Paul was raked over the coals for just saying that he believed parents should have some input. Some input. Well, parents should have all the input. Doctors should be able to offer advice. And I guess one could argue that government should be able to offer advice. But that's the extent. It's not about limiting parents' power. It's about limiting the power of the government. It's about limiting the power of the doctors. Because at the end of the day, it is not their concern. It is not their business what people do with their personal lives, and how people administer health care to their children. Make the options available, sure, but butt out when it comes to the personal decision. So let me point out here, 2008 Hillary Clinton is slightly different than 2015 Hillary Clinton. That's no surprise. But she says in 2008 she was committed to determining what, if any, kind of link there is between vaccines and autism. So she seemed a little bit open to the idea in 2008, but she's abruptly changed her position now at the drop of a hat. And that's been the hallmark of her career. This is a person who had this donned a atrociously fake Southern accent for a Kentucky audience. I mean, it's absolutely nauseous to watch Hillary Clinton's performance. So just go Google Hillary Clinton Kentucky accent or Southern accent. You'll see it come up. You'll want to puke. But apparently she thought geography was too complex a concept for a Kentucky audience to grasp, but her backpedaling and shifting of her positions in 2015 don't seem to matter very much to her either. Now, again, this is a woman who just cackles uncontrollably at the brutal murder of Gaddafi, and people are going to take her word as anything but a lie or the word of a psychopath, of a mental patient. So Rand Paul says that people should have some input. Well, that was enough to get him abused and raked over the coals, right? And his statement was incredibly tepid. Paul's statement is concerning enough because of its tepidity. Paul just said that he thought most vaccines should be voluntary and that parents should have some input in the decision whether or not to vaccinate. So all he did was say that vaccines should be voluntary. He's being attacked for saying that vaccines should be voluntary. And of course, he said that and then immediately went out and got a vaccine and took a picture with the vaccine and says, "See, I take vaccines. I'm not a science denier." Of course, Chris Christie had the same thing. He said parents should have some measure of choice. Some measure of choice. And he got raked over the coals, too, for being a science denier. So let me tell you what's happening here. The debate is being framed. The debate is being set up. The debate over whether or not vaccines are safe or effective left the building a long time ago. You allowed that to leave the building. And I mean the people out there who are those who don't believe in the vaccines are safe or effective, or have opposition to vaccination, or at least believe that people should have the right to opt out. You guys have lost the debate on whether or not they're safe or effective, and this is how it's done. The real debate now taking place is not whether or not they're safe or effective. It's whether parents have the right to choose whether or not to vaccinate their children, or even themselves, or even if they have input on that decision. Well, let me state this clearly. I don't care what any government official says or what any doctor has to say. Parents do have the right to refuse vaccination for themselves and their children. End of debate. End of story. Now, constant propaganda from the mainstream press would lead you to believe otherwise. So the opposing voices that are allegedly representing the anti-vaxxers, which is an insult term, like Holocaust denier, people like Rand Paul, people like Chris Christie, if these are the guys that are representing you, you have most certainly lost, right? You should never be on the same side as these guys. Now, look at the way the debate has been framed. You've got Hillary Clinton, and you also had Barack Obama coming out and saying vaccines were great. So you got Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama here. These are both Democrats and both favorites of pseudo-liberals and the pro-war left everywhere. They're in opposition to parental choice. And on the other hand, you've got Rand Paul and Chris Christie, both Republicans, both favorites of pseudo-conservatives and austerity ghouls everywhere, and they're supporting parental choice. So now the debate is a partisan issue. If you think vaccines are great and you oppose parental choice or individual choice to opt out, then you're a young, trendy, informed, intellectual, reasonable Democrat, right? If you support even the basic right of a person to opt out of vaccination, then you're an anti-science, stubborn, irresponsible Luddite Republican. You believe the earth is 5,000 years old or something like that. So within weeks, there's going to be no in between. You're going to pick your camp. You're going to be a Republican or a Democrat. You're not going to have room for critical thought. You're either going to side with the trendy liberals, the trendy liberals, or the Luddite Republicans. You don't want to have a vaccine forcibly shoved into your child and then told to suck it basically when the kid gets autism or has some debilitating disease. Then you're going to have to side with the Republicans. Well, you shouldn't be siding with either. And this is how a debate has been lost, because they constantly frame these situations as the anti-vaxxer movement. Well, there is no anti-vaxxer movement. If there was an anti-vaxxer movement, I would have joined it a long time ago. There isn't one. There's a group of scattered people who refuse to vaccinate or believe that there's something wrong with the vaccine, so they refuse to take it. Nobody's out here pressuring the government to ban vaccines. Nobody's out here trying to prevent any of you from taking vaccines. In fact, to be quite honest, I don't care if you take vaccines. I feel sorry for your children if you vaccinate them and it causes them health problems. I feel sorry for you if you vaccinate yourself and it causes health problems. But at the end of the day, it's your choice to do either. So you can vaccinate yourself and your kids. In fact, you can take 1 million shots of mercury or aluminum or whatever the hell else you want to choose. You can take 50 MMR shots at one time. You can shove them up your ass for all I care. I couldn't care less. But at the end of the day, when you tell me I don't have a choice, you're crossing a line. That should be how this debate is handled. And quite frankly, there should be an anti-vaxxer movement. There should be a movement out there that's designed to inform people about the dangers of these shots and encourage them not to take it. Provide them with the information. Again, I'm not arguing that people shouldn't have access to vaccines if they want them. If they've looked at the evidence and they come to a different conclusion, they think, or they think the risks outweigh the benefits outweigh the risks, then go for it. If you think the vaccines are safe or effective, you have as much of a right to choose, to make your decision for yourself and your children as I do. But I have that right. So let's get that straight. Now, to the people in this mythical anti-vaxxer movement, there are so many people who have been overcome with this fantasy, this fallacy of anarchy that cripples every legitimate political movement due to its own impotence, its own self-checking mechanisms to stop people from actually getting anything done, or they simply want to toe the line and they want to look professional and they don't want to look unreasonable. So they come out and they say things like, nobody's going to take your right to opt out away. These are people, in the so-called anti-vaxxer movement saying, no, let's not get crazy. There's no huge conspiracy here that they're not going to take your rights away. Well, bullshit. Go look up the laws. There's already laws being submitted now, I think at the federal level, but certainly in California, to take people's rights to opt out away. There's also executive orders on the books that would allow for forced quarantine and that sort of thing. And of course, forced vaccination would take a part of it as well. So don't be fooled by these people either. The problem is the mainstream media comes out and creates an issue where there wasn't any. Nobody was concerned about the vaccine issue. It only took a few seeds, the story of Disney World with the I think it was it whooping cough or was it measles? I think it might have been measles. The story of Disney World was put out. A few well-placed op-eds in the Washington Times, Washington Post, Huffington Post, especially the Huffington Post, the New York Times, that sort of thing. An op-ed editorial that pops up here and there, a few hit pieces here and there, a few TV shows here and there, and then all of a sudden the onslaught of media propaganda attacking people who don't vaccinate. Well, let's go through something real quick. Most of the people who got these diseases were vaccinated. An outbreak is being considered one person. One person gets measles and it's considered an outbreak. That's not an outbreak. That's an isolated case, to be honest. There's also, again, most people who got the disease had been vaccinated, and nobody has died. Despite the fact that this is the new Ebola, nobody has died of the measles in this epidemic. There are numerous reports of children who have died of the shot, however. I think there's over 100 reports of this now. And again, I go back to this tried and true question. If your child is vaccinated and my child isn't, what does your child have to fear from my child? And I know the response is, well, my child is too young to take the MMR shot. There's a subset of children who are too young. Well, maybe you shouldn't have their ass out at Disney World, where they can get any number of diseases. Not just measles, not just mumps, not just rubella, but they could get the flu. They could get all kinds of diseases being out in public. That's what happens when you bring people who have weak immune systems out into groups of hordes of other people, particularly children who've been around hordes of other children. And in places where all these children are, wiping their nose with their hand and then touching the guardrails. But hey, no, it's a small subset of people who didn't take the vaccine that endangered your child, right? To be quite honest, your child is also not my responsibility. If the child's too young to take the vaccine and you believe they work, I don't really care if you believe they work, but don't bring them around large groups of people where the disease might be prevalent. It is not the the duty of the majority to undergo a medical procedure simply because you're in a distinct minority of people who want to act in an irresponsible way. So that's on you. As a matter of fact, people who take the vaccine, it is documented, it is scientifically proven, it is, don't be a science denier. You can shed the disease if you've taken the vaccine. You could shed the virus. So keep your child away from people who have taken the vaccine. In fact, keep your child away from everybody. Quarantine your child. So it doesn't work. The actual logic of the argument doesn't work. But that doesn't keep the mainstream media from making this a major issue, does it? So we're about done with this. But I wanted to just point out too, I've got to mention this for the conservatives among us who probably rightly hate Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, but have for some reason they look at any of these freaks in the GOP primary or the GOP pool and think that these are good people. Now, I don't know what in the hell is wrong with people who would vote for some clown like Ben Carson. The guy has absolutely no qualifications. You know why conservatives like Ben Carson? For two reasons. He went to a presidential dinner and he gave a speech and he attacked Obama in the speech. And he didn't attack Obama for anything legitimate. He attacked Obama for being too tough on rich people. He attacked Obama for being too tough on rich people, as Obama does everything he possibly can to aid Wall Street and aid corporate America. We've got this moron, Ben Carson, standing up there giving a speech about how we shouldn't be hurting rich people because they create jobs. Yeah, you could tell that by your 35% unemployment, by the way. I mean, 25% unemployment. They create jobs real well. I guess they are creating jobs in China, but that's free labor, so it's not really a job if you're not getting paid. Now, that's one reason they like him, but the main reason they like Ben Carson, the main reason Republicans and conservatives love Ben Carson is because he's black. And they want to put a much-needed black face on the Republican Party because, you know, as most of you obviously know, the majority of black people are not interested in the Republican Party. So they want this guy, they want this clown to put up to run for president so they can claim, oh, look, we're not racist. We voted for a black guy. We're supporting a black guy. Ben Carson, he's great. He's great. And you can say whatever you want then because you're supporting the black guy, right? Now, conservatives obviously have no more morals, no more ethical standards, no more intelligence than the liberals have either. So I'd just like to point out, I did an article here, GOP hero Ben Carson supports mandatory vaccination. This is what his statement is about the vaccines, because all the candidates were going through the requisite, oh, no, I'm not a science denier. I believe in vaccines. I believe that they work and all that kind of stuff. And I believe they should be mandated. Well, this is what Carson says. Although I strongly believe in individual rights and the rights of parents to raise their children as they see fit, I also recognize that public health and public safety are extremely important in our society. Certain communicable diseases have been largely eradicated by immunization policies in this country, and we should not allow those diseases to return by foregoing safe immunization programs for philosophical, religious, or other reasons when we have the means to eradicate them. Okay. So he should have, I guess, tweeted hashtag I stand with Hillary, but that would have been obvious to the conservative dupes out there who think that, you know, the Republican Party is somehow the party of freedom. But, all right, we have Carson saying this. So first of all, I'd like to correct something. Communicable diseases have not been largely eradicated by immunization policies in this country. Communicable diseases have been largely eradicated by increased living standards, and it's by something, increased sanitation, increased public works, you know, something the Republicans would hate. Increased public works, increased infrastructure, the labor movement, you know, all the things that they oppose. Had nothing to do with immunizations. But notice that he's saying that you shouldn't have the ability to opt out for philosophical or religious reasons. And this is a Republican hero. Okay? Now, let me just point out one other thing about this Republican hero. Ben Carson was asked by Glenn Beck his stance on the Second Amendment and semi-automatic weapons, and Carson responded that it depends on where you live, and he doesn't mean America, by the way. He went on to say, I think if you live in the midst of a lot of people, and I'm afraid that semi-automatic weapon is going to fall into the hands of a crazy person, I would rather you not have it. So in other words, he's not concerned with personal choice or personal liberty. He doesn't think you have a right to own a gun in a large, in a city, basically, is what he's saying. I think if you live in the midst of a lot of people, and I'm afraid that semi-automatic weapon, I'm sorry, Ben Carson is afraid. Let's eradicate the Second Amendment to the Constitution because Ben Carson is a coward. Because Ben Carson is in the corner weeping. I'm afraid that that semi-automatic weapon is going to fall in the hands of a crazy person. Oh, God. Yeah. Well, you've got millions of weapons into the hands of crazy people. And they wear suits, and they make other crazy people shoot other crazy people, or generally innocent people. But I'm not going to continue with this. That article's up there. You can read it. And everything's sourced and linked. I'm not going to go into this fool anymore than what I've already done. It's really a road to nowhere, because if you're voting for the Democrat or Republican in the primary, you're a bit too far gone anyway. You shouldn't really have any credence to say anything. Your opinion to me is null and void if you're voting for a Republican or Democrat in the U.S. presidential primary, and the Libertarians and the Greens aren't that much better either. So, let's talk about another Republican hero, though, shall we? Let's talk about John McCain, G.I. John McCain, the un-American hero. Now, I've talked about John McCain on a number of instances. I've talked about John McCain's connections to terrorists. I've talked about John McCain's providing material assistance to terrorists like Al-Qaeda and ISIS and his admissions of doing that. I've talked about John McCain's connections to Kiev fascists. And I've talked about John McCain's connections to Libyan terrorists. We'll probably talk a little more about that this evening. But what I wanted to point out, as all the conservative guys are walking around swaggering and feeling like they're tough because they were able to send other people's children, 18-year-old high school graduates, overseas to go kill men, women, and children who did absolutely nothing to them, but it somehow makes them feel that they're tough and free. As they are worshiping Chris Kyle and probably John McCain, because John McCain was a hero, because he went over to someone else's country who did absolutely nothing to him, and he slaughtered people in Vietnam, and then he got shot down and captured. And somehow that is what qualifies you as being a hero in this world, in this day and time. Getting shot down and being a prisoner of war and fighting a war against people who did nothing to you. Killing innocent people. Being a murderer is what gets you the designation of being a hero in this country and in most countries, unfortunately. And you wonder why the world's in the shape it's in. So we had January 29th of this year, we had Henry Kissinger, who was scheduled to address the U.S. Senate Armed Services Committee. Of course, McCain is a part of that committee. And I just wanted to say this. If you ever believe that there's any such thing as justice in the world, let me tell you that there isn't. Okay? There's no justice in the world. I'll tell you why. In Vietnam, millions of Vietnamese, all of them, including the Viet Cong, including the North Vietnamese Army, were innocent because we started that war. So millions of Vietnamese people were killed. And in terms of American soldiers, 30,000 American soldiers were killed. But John McCain and John Kerry survive. Out of 30,000 American soldiers, John McCain and John Kerry survive. There's no justice in the world. I would be happy to trade John McCain or John Kerry for any of those soldiers. I'd be happy to trade them for any of the Vietnamese. Hell, you don't even have to give us the soldiers of the Vietnamese. But I'm not going to get off topic here. Henry Kissinger, January 29th, was scheduled to address the U.S. Armed Services Committee. And, of course, he's in the tradition of, the bloodthirsty killers and traitors and psychopaths that address members of Congress. So we're going to have Bibi Netanyahu talking there, so he fits the mold. That surprise, it shouldn't really be a surprise that Kissinger was going to speak to Congress, and it shouldn't really be a surprise that the committee had terrorist sympathizer John McCain on it as well. I think the only thing that was surprising about the whole incident was that there were actually protesters there. I think it was Code Pink. And Kissinger's arrival and the beginning of his speech, it was interrupted by the protesters who were trying to list off his crimes against humanity, but they didn't have the requisite number of years it would take to do so. So they called in Capitol Hill Police and had the protesters removed. But of course, John McCain rode in on a white horse to protect Henry Kissinger, screaming at the protesters and just say, you're going to have to shut up or I'm going to have you arrested. And then as the protesters were being removed, McCain goes, get out of here, you low-life scum. So McCain then started apologizing to Kissinger, said, this is what he says, Dr. Kissinger, I hope on behalf of all the members of this committee on both sides of the aisle, in fact, from all of my colleagues, I'd like to apologize for allowing such disgraceful behavior towards a man who served his country with the greatest distinction. I apologize profusely. cue collective vomit. Now, Americans, particularly Vietnam veterans, might remember such disgraceful behavior towards a man who served his country with the greatest distinction taking place in the Capitol some time ago. But it was John McCain's performance in Congress when they were watching that incident. Now, we have an article that I would encourage everybody to read if you're interested in John McCain's treachery and John McCain's abandonment of Vietnam veterans, Vietnam prisoners of war. And this to me is treason. Sidney Schanberg wrote an article entitled "The War Secrets Senator John McCain Hides," and I would encourage everybody to read that article. It's a very long article, but he really exposes McCain for the human filth that he is. And essentially, what most people don't know about McCain, even if they know his terrorist sympathies taking place today, and his awful voting record, most people don't know that it was John McCain who was instrumental in refusing to allow any attempts to discover or recover missing American prisoners of war in Vietnam, or even the possibility of allowing any further investigation to see if the Americans were still being held captive. It was McCain's incessant reliance on his military service as some type of qualification, because Americans have been brainwashed to believe that military service, the ability to put on a uniform, take out your brain, and give control of it to someone else, is a qualification. Falling for war propaganda to the point that you're willing to kill other people or be killed for it is somehow a qualification in America. Because Americans are so easily fooled by this militarism, McCain's reliance on that military service as a qualification got him out of a lot of this controversy. Now, John McCain has had a long time opposition to releasing documents and information about American prisoners of war in Vietnam and missing in action, soldiers missing in action who have not been accounted for. Now, McCain, all this information was that he was held a prisoner in Hanoi for 5.5 years. It's interesting that someone who's been a prisoner of war for 5.5 years would have such a staunch resistance to opening the POW and MIA records. But, what I will say is that McCain's injuries don't jive with torture. They jive with improper bailout procedure. That's why he can't lift his arm. And if you ever see him give a speech, you can see that he can't lift his arm. It's not because of torture. It's because he bailed out improperly. So this McCain anti-disclosure campaign has been in close cooperation with the Pentagon and the intelligence community, and it's been successful. Right? There's thousands of documents that would have and should have been declassified a long time ago have been legislated into secrecy. Right? They are still not open. Now, all the Pentagon debriefings, and this is an example of this, all the Pentagon debriefings of the prisoners who returned from Vietnam are classified. They're closed to the public, and that's a statute. They've been classified and closed to the public under a statute that John McCain was instrumental in enacting in the 1990s. And he claims that it's to protect the privacy of former prisoners of war, and he gives it. He gives that statute as the reason for not making his own debriefing public. Now, a lot of Vietnam veterans, a lot of former POWs have hated McCain for keeping these files and other wartime files sealed up, but his explanation, again, is been offered a number of times in the Senate hearings and floor speeches, is that no one has been proven still alive, and that releasing the files would revive painful memories and cause needless emotional stress to former prisoners, their families, and the families of MIA still unaccounted for. But the problem is, if some of these returned prisoners, as this has always been the case at the conclusion of war, reveal information to their debriefing officers about other prisoners that might still be held in captivity, there is no justification for filtering that information through the Pentagon rather than allowing the materials to become public, or at least source materials. We had, in Korea, debriefings from Korean war prisoners were made available to the American public in full, and they were provided. They provided both the citizens of the U.S. and the government investigators who were working on that information with important information about other Americans who were missing in that war. Now, obviously, most families of missing soldiers, no matter how emotionally drained they may have been, would like to know more about what happened to their loved one, and they would also want to know what the government was doing to rescue those soldiers. So hundreds of MIA families have been questioning this secrecy for years. But other people are suspecting, and I suspect that this is part of it, that McCain's insistence to keep this information classified revolves more around the fact that releasing the debriefings might open up something in McCain's own closet, some skeletons that might tumble out if they open this. I mean, we have a small number of former POWs and MIA families and veterans saying that McCain has something that he wants to keep hidden. And, of course, Schanberg in his article says, without the release of the files, we can only say that the accusations are unsubstantiated and that they're speculation. But you can't prove them otherwise, again, because the documents haven't been released. So the main reason for releasing these documents is to find out if there's any information about missing soldiers in the documents, and that the McCain and Pentagon have kept sealed, and about how many prisoners were held back by North Vietnam after the Paris Peace Treaty was signed in 1973, in January 1973. The defense and intelligence establishment has resisted the declassification of critical records on this subject for years, and McCain has been the main congressional force behind the resistance. Now, the prisoner return in 1973 saw 591 Americans returned by North Vietnam. The problem was that the U.S. intelligence list of men believed to be alive at that time in captivity in Vietnam, Laos, and possibly southern China and the Soviet Union was larger, much larger. They had, hundreds of men larger. State Department stated publicly in 1973 that intelligence data showed the prisoner list to be incomplete. So an example would be only 9 of the 591 returnees came out of Laos. There were experts in the U.S. military intelligence apparatus that listed 311 men as missing in Laos, and their field reports indicated that many of those men were probably still alive. Now, Hanoi, Vietnam, claimed that it had returned all the prisoners it had, and Nixon, on March 29th, 1973, seconded that claim. He told the nation on TV, quote, "All of our American POWs are on their way home." And Nixon, of course, was a trustworthy guy. This discrepancy has never been acknowledged or explained by Washington, and the relationship to John McCain is the fact that over the years, John McCain has almost single-handedly pushed through legislation desired by the Pentagon to make it impossible, or at least much harder for the public, to acquire information on POWs and MIA soldiers, and much easier for the defense bureaucracy to keep that information hidden. Now, we also have the case of the Truth Bill, and this is John McCain related too. This is what the stated goal of the bill. All right, this is the bill stated this, and I'll quote: The head of each department or agency which holds or receives any records and information, including live sighting reports, which have been correlated or possibly correlated to the United States personnel listed as prisoner of war or missing in action from World War II, the Korean conflict, and the Vietnam conflict, shall make available to the public all such records and information held or received by that department or agency. In addition, the Department of Defense shall make available to the public with its records and information a complete listing of United States personnel classified as prisoners of war, missing in action or killed in action, body not returned from World War II, the Korean conflict, and the Vietnam conflict. So, pretty good bill, right? Because that's going to bring this information to light. That would have released these documents. Well, the Pentagon obviously opposed this bill, and it was defeated in 1989. In 1991, it reappeared again, but it was quickly defeated again. And there was plenty of interest, by the way, from family members of missing soldiers as well as the general American public. But because of this interest, there was another bill that was inserted in its place, and it was called the McCain bill, right? So, This McCain bill basically destroyed and eviscerated the Truth bill. It created this bureaucratic maze from which only a small portion of documents could come out of, and it passed. It became law. So the bill was so restrictive that in its provisions, that one clause actually said the Pentagon didn't even have to inform the public when it received intelligence that Americans were alive in captivity. So it said, for one of the things it did, it decreed that only 3 categories of information could be released. In other words, so it says information that may pertain to the location, treatment, or condition for unaccounted for personnel from the Vietnam War. And it was later amended in 1995 and 96 to include the Cold War in Korea. But it said if any information is received about anything other than location, treatment, or condition under the statute, which was enacted in 1991, it doesn't get disclosed. After that, there was another part of the bill which says that before that information could be released to the public, permission had to be granted by the primary next of kin, or PNOC. All right, P-N-O-K. In the case of Vietnam, letters were sent by the Department of Defense to the 2,266 primary next of kin family members, and 600 declined consent. 243 failed to respond, so that was considered a no. So, lastly, we've also got the McCain Act not specifically ordering the declassification of the information. It actually provides the Department of Defense with other justifications for withholding the documents, and one of the clauses say that if the information may compromise the safety of any United States personnel who remain not accounted for but who may still be alive in captivity, then the Secretary of Defense may withhold the record or other information for the disclosure otherwise required by this section. So basically, that means that the Defense Department is not obligated to tell the public about prisoners believed to be alive in captivity and any efforts that might be made to rescue them. So it only has to notify the White House and intelligence committees in the Senate and the House. So the committees themselves are forbidden from releasing that information. They're under gag orders, essentially. Now, the McCain Act has been used to deny access to other sorts of records as well. As part of APBnews.com Freedom of Information Act request for the records of a mutiny on a merchant marine vessel in the 1970s, that was rejected by a Defense Department official who cited the McCain Act. And also they've got also requests for information about Americans missing in the Korean War and declared dead for the last 45 years. That has been denied by officials who reference the McCain Act. 1996, however, there was another bill that appeared. It was called the Missing Service Personnel Act. The bill attempted to force the Pentagon to do more and act faster to find and recover missing military service personnel. And the bill had measures that required very strict reporting requirements for these purposes. So that was another glimmer of hope there, but John McCain once again rode into town to destroy that bill and any potential that that bill may have had to discover missing military personnel or those who might be missing in the future. So we have the 1995 version of required a unit commander to report to his theater commander within 2 days that a person was missing and describe what rescue and recovery efforts were underway. The McCain amendments, because he came in and helped amend this thing, allow 10 days to pass before a report had to be made. In the 1995 Act, the theater commander, after receiving the MIA report, would have 14 days to report to his cabinet secretary in Washington. His report had to certify that all necessary actions were being taken and that all appropriate assets were being used to resolve the status of the missing person. This section, because of McCain, was taken from the Act and replaced with language that made the cabinet secretary, not the theater commander, the recipient of the report from the field. And all the requirements that that there would be certification to make sure that all the appropriate methods were taken to get this person back, they were also taken out of the bill. Now, the backers of the original bill cited the Pentagon's record on MIAs, right, and said this was a stained record. They argued that military history had shown that speed of action is critical to the chances of recovering a missing person in the military. And they argued, and I would agree with them, that moving that bureaucracy to Washington was just a way to sweep the issue under a rug, is to make sure that nothing would be done. McCain also came in, I should mention, and removed all of the enforcement teeth, right? The original act provided for criminal penalties for anybody, like military bureaucrats in Washington, who destroyed or covered up or withheld any information from families about a missing man. McCain erased this part of the law. He said the penalties would have a chilling effect on the Pentagon's ability to recruit personnel for its POW MIA office. So why would they need to? They have John McCain on the Senate Armed Services Committee. So that does enough. That's the chilling effect on the office to begin with. So McCain has personally acted as the first line of defense against any person who might suggest that POWs were left to their fate in Vietnam. On this issue especially, McCain acts behind this carefully crafted but false veneer of patriotism and military service that appear to make him infallible in the eyes of many of you low-information voters who view military service, just the act of serving the country, as this impenetrable armor. So this is your hero in action. So we've got information here from Schanberg in that article that I have been mentioning. McCain does not deal lightly with those who disagree with him on any of these issues, or really any issue, but especially these issues, or people who suggest that the evidence shows that a significant number of prisoners were still alive and kept as future bargaining chips when he came home in the group of the 591 released in 1973. He has regularly attacked any group or person who tries to keep prying more evidence about MIAs. He calls them hoaxers. He calls them charlatans. He calls them conspiracy theorists. This term, conspiracy theorist, it's anybody who believes that prisoners were left behind in Vietnam is a conspiracy theorist. Anybody who's getting called a name by this asshole ought to take that as a badge of courage. So he calls, this is what he says about the MIA POW guys. He says, the bizarre rantings of the MIA hobbyists. So it's funny. I wonder if a lefty, I wonder if Barack Obama gave a speech and referred to the POW MIA groups as bizarre rantings of the MIA hobbyists. I wonder if he said that, what the reaction from these stupid conservatives, these dumbass conservatives, I wonder what it would be. I suspect we'd hear socialist, communist, anti-American, unpatriotic, doesn't love America, hates American service personnel, doesn't support the troops. I suppose we'd hear all this, but John McCain, we hear crickets. So, and again, if you're a first-time listener, I have a staunch record of hating Obama here. So just wanted to point that out. Not that I have to justify that. But McCain also describes the MIA POW peoples, individuals primarily who make their living off keeping the issue alive. Right? So, it's funny. We've got Colonel Ted Guy, who was a highly admired POW and one of the most steadfast resistors in the prison camps. He wrote an angry open letter to the senator in one of the MIA newsletters, and he said that McCain's stream of insults. He says, quote, "John, does this include Senator Bob Smith and other concerned elected officials? Does this include the families of the missing, where there is overwhelming evidence that their loved ones were last known alive? Does this include some of your fellow POWs?" But McCain didn't address it because McCain likes dissent the way he likes his veterans, silent by any means necessary. So there's your patriotism. There's your service right there by John McCain. So John McCain has been the biggest denier of anybody when it comes to the possibility that American soldiers were left on the battlefield. So McCain consistently says that again and again he has seen no credible evidence that more than a tiny handful of men might have been alive in captivity after the official prison return in 1973. He dismisses all of the subsequent radio intercepts, the live sightings, the satellite photos, the CIA reports, the defector information, recovered enemy documents, reports of ransom demands, thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of information indicating live captives. He says all that's meaningless. He even describes those intelligence reports as the rough equivalent of UFO and alien sightings. Now, there's been a number of instances where McCain has erupted violently at people who mention this issue. Some of his former staffers and colleagues were a bit perplexed why a former POW would work so hard to keep POW and MIA information from actually coming out. And so we've got all that out there as well. McCain admitted in his own book, Faith of My Fathers, if you can stomach this type of garbage. I mean, you think about the people who actually bought John McCain's book. Now, most of these books, by the way, when people like McCain or Obama write these books, the books are ghostwritten, and the publishing companies print millions of books, and a lot of these books just go on the dollar shelf or they get dumped, but they get lots of money. The author gets lots of money, so it's a payoff, basically. I mean, do you honestly believe that McCain wrote such a highly popular book, or that Barack Obama wrote such a highly popular book, or Forbes or Bill Gates? These books are actually just covers for payoffs. But I'm not going to get off topic here. Faith of My Fathers is the John McCain book, and he says that he felt bad about his captivity because he knew he was getting special treatment because he was the son of an admiral. That was John S. McCain II, he was the commander-in-chief of all U.S. forces in the Pacific region, including Vietnam, and he also had quite the connection to the USS Liberty incident where Israel bombed, our 51st state bombed the United States USS Liberty. So people should go check that up if you haven't heard of that. The Senator John McCain repeatedly in his book he says he has guilt and disgrace at having he broke under torture and gave the North Vietnamese a taped confession which they broadcast over the camp loudspeakers, saying he was a war criminal. Well, he was. Who said he bombed a school. Well, he would have if he had been given the orders. He says, I felt faithless and couldn't control my despair. He had 2 half-hearted attempts at suicide. Said that, well, that's unfortunate it didn't succeed. And he said he lived he lived in dread that his father would find out. won't go into all that, but the writer Schanberg that I've been mentioning asked the question, how would McCain's forced confession alone explain his campaign against releasing MIA or POW information? Right? Some veterans and other McCain watchers have suggested that it's McCain's family tradition, and his concern, because his grandfather was also an admiral, his concern was that it haunted him and prevented him from opening up any information that could revive, any previously unpublished details of the era, his own history. In other words, they're suggesting that maybe there's a little more to it, that maybe the story of John McCain, the veneer of the prisoner of war and all that kind of stuff, wasn't exactly the reality of the situation. I've got to wrap this up. I wish I could finish this. I'll try. I've got a couple minutes. Let me run through this really quick. We've got Dolores Apodaca Alfon. She was the chairwoman of the National Alliance of Families. Her brother was a pilot, Captain Victor J. Apodaca, out of the Air Force Academy. He was shot down over Dong Hue of North Vietnam in 1967. One person in the two-man plane survived. Beeper signals from a pilot's distress radio were picked up by overhead helicopters, but the cloud cover was too heavy to go in. Hanoi turned over bone fragments they claimed to be Apodaca's. The Pentagon declared the fragments to be animal bones. Of course, now they're saying, oh no, it's actually the pilot's bones. But he's still unaccounted for. This woman's testimony in 1992, it was revealing. She mentioned the fact that there was clear evidence. There were overhead satellite symbol pictures, distress symbols coming from the ground. That this man had. There were these tools that were given to these pilots so they could send up distress signals, and that he did, and that this information is clear, that there were distress signals being sent from the ground on a number of occasions, long after he crashed, but the information was covered up by G.I. John McCain and, of course, his friend Skull and Bones John Kerry. And I think we'll continue John McCain next week, I believe, and then we'll get into some other things. So, ladies and gentlemen, tonight has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
ISIL now, the estimates are that there's some 31,000 metastasizing in a very rapid fashion into a much larger force. To many of us, that seems like a inadequate response to what...
Would you please be quiet? I'm asking you now to please leave the room. Please remove this lady. Please remove her. The disruptions are not going to be acceptable to anybody. Please remove the lady from the room. Thank you very much to our office. Thank you.
appreciate special attention from this group, Mr. Chairman. Senator McCain.
Shame on you, Senator McCain.
For more news, visit pigminews.com.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.